Hello, everybody. This is Christian Assad, and I'm a preventive interventional cardiologist. And I've been asked a couple of questions from the American Heart Association regarding intermittent fasting. I tried to make this presentation easy to understand, not only for physicians, but for patients as well. I believe in the future I'll try to make a longer version of this one because there's a lot of material, but secondary to time constraints, I'll have to speed it up. But hopefully everybody can understand everything that we're going to be going through. So first, I would like to guide you through the timeline of how I'm going to approach it and the questions that I was asked. So a little bit of my personal experience and introduction. So how and why did I start fasting? How did it impact my life? Not only my life at home, but my professional life as well. A couple of basic concepts. What is intermittent fasting? What are the different methods of intermittent fasting? Is it a fad? Are there other health benefits beyond weight loss? Now, physiology behind intermittent fasting. So, I made a summary in this one, and it's a couple of slides that I will not go over, but you can pause and you're going to find very, very good information. And then frequent questions regarding intermittent fasting. Now, I will also be debunking a couple of questions or myths. Now, secondary to timing, I emphasize that I will not go into detail. I will just provide the information. The bibliographies are at the end. There's approximately 29 or 30 if you want to go into detail. And if you want further, I have about 480 articles dealing with different concepts regarding low carb, keto, intermittent fasting. But this is plainly focused right now on intermittent fasting. So let's get it started. So introduction and personal experience. Why did I start fasting? Well, it's quite simple. November 2017, my guidelines, the guidelines that I recommend to a patients were failing me. I'm an active individual, just like many of you. Many cardiologists are out there, many physicians are out there, and we keep gaining weight. We keep gaining weight by either trying the eat less, move more program, or by restricting ourselves and fat-free stuff. And you know what? It was not working for me. So the way that I started doing fasting is a little bit different, and this varies from individual to individual. There's people that can do fasting very easily, and there are people that cannot. But in my case, what I was doing differently is I started by implementing a low carbohydrate lifestyle, and in my case, that was the key for me to be able to do different windows of fasting. And as time went by and I became more efficient and basically adapted to use fat as energy and ketones, that is when for me the fasting episode were very easy to accomplish. For other individuals, it varies. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about this. But this is not a one size fits all, and we need to experiment with it. For me, fasting initially would have been impossible since I suffer migraines since I'm 12. So just skipping breakfast was a daunting task because I knew I was going to get migraines. So in my case, it was little bit different, and the way I embarked on this was basically by trial and error. I had no idea of what I was getting into, and I think that's what makes it interesting because as time went by and I noticed the changes and the benefits, that's where I started reading more about it and, well, and to a certain extent, figuring out that I was doing, to a certain extent, a modified ketogenic diet, and we needed to tweak a little bit sodium, potassium, magnesium, and other things. So this is my story. I said, you know what? Christmas is coming, Thanksgiving is coming, I'm done. I'm not going to be gaining weight and then trying to lose it for the rest of the year, and I'm not going to be able to. So I started with 100 grams of carbohydrates. Then I went by, no biggie, no problem. I mean, I was eating still my 3 times a day. And then I went down to 50 to 80. I started noticing that I was actually less hungry by this time. But when I hit less than 50, I did notice that a couple of times when I was actually at work, I started skipping lunch and I did not get my migraines. I was feeling much better. I was more energetic. And this for me was the time that I started doing a fasting window. So by skipping breakfast already and not needing it, basically just it piled up from my sleep and the last meal of the previous day. And I was already fasting for 16 hours. Now, fasting started here. I'll go into the details about fasting shortly, but I just wanted to explain my experience. So as I started fasting and doing less than 50 grams, I started noticing a couple of things. One, I started feeling in my mouth like I was sucking on a nickel. I mean, I had this rusty metallic taste, sometimes a fruity taste, and that's where I started checking my ketones. And that is why, or when I realized that by implementing an intermittent fasting scenario with a low carbohydrate lifestyle, we will achieve episodes of ketosis. Now, for those that are cringing right now by me saying low carb, remember, you can achieve low carb by doing a Mediterranean diet, paleo diet, vegan diet, carnivore diet, you name it. Whatever you're choosing, you can actually find variations to implement a low carbohydrate lifestyle. Now, for me, the combination between intermittent fasting and low carb is just fantastic. Now, it depends on the individual. For me, I needed to implement the low carb initially because I could not do the fast. There are individuals that can jump straight forward for a 24-hour fast and deplete 80% of their liver glycogen. So this depends on the person. But long story short, then I decreased it to 25. I noticed I could do it. Then I went to 1 meal a day. Point, not restricting my calories. I'm restricting my window. More on this shortly. So then I started implementing 1-day fast, 2-day fast, 3-day fast, and up to more recently a 5-day fast. I've also implemented a zero carb scenario for a couple of weeks, a little bit over a month, and this was a pure carnivore diet. For me, I mean, I don't get the fantastic results that everybody is saying. I enjoy my vegetables with my real food, with my salmon, with my fish. So it just depends. And there's a lot of variation here depending on the individual. This is just to show what happened after my 5-day fast. I went out for a 12K run, and you know what? We can do it. There's no issues. I mean, if we're running on our own stores, our own fatty acids, basically we're shifting energies from carbs to glucose to basically using fatty acids as energy, ketones as energy. This is just, I mean, basically my glucose here was 68 with 4.6 milliosmolar, and using Ethan Weiss's device, the keto, this is basically measuring my acetone in breath. This is measuring my BHB in blood. So now, that was my experience. Now let's go to the basic concepts of what is intermittent fasting, what are the different methods of intermittent fasting. So what is it? It's basically eating in a particular cycle. It's choosing a window in which we are going to be eating and choosing a window in which we will not be eating. But there is one key. We will not be restricting our caloric intake. That remains the same. You're eating the same amount of calories, but you're applying it in a particular window. And that's the key in this concept. So what are the different methods that we see? We can see alternate day fasting, in which somebody can fast for 24 hours and then the rest of the day, the next day, eat normally, normally being your 3 meals a day, if that's how you eat. Modified fasting regimen, this can be a 5-2, in which you have 5 days of eating like your usual habits and doing a 48-hour fast. And then comes the time-restricted feeding, which in my opinion is probably the easiest way to start and apply the concept. Now, what this means is that you have a window of 16 hours that you're going to be fasting. And the easiest way that I explain this to patients and colleagues is, let's say we set up an 8 p.m. point, and we say after 8 p.m. you're not going to be eating anything. That's it, you're done. So you need to have a nice, high nutritious meal. So after 8, then let's say comes 12. 12, you're sleeping already. Then it comes 7 a.m. And by 8 a.m., you already fasted for 12 hours. Now, the two benefits of fasting apparently start after a 16-hour fast. So if you already fasted for 12 hours, all you need is 4 more hours. There's some people that struggle with this pushing for 4-hour fast. What can you do? You can have a cup of coffee. You can have a cup of tea. You can have a cup of mineral water. And the point to here is that those little hacks or tricks can actually help you to push for that 16-hour fast and basically achieve and get to your 12 or your noon, which is going to be your fasting window. So now you're going to be eating from noon to 8 p.m. How much? I don't care. I want you to focus on nutritious food. Now, in my case, I recommend a low carbohydrate lifestyle. Why? Because I believe that these two in combination work fantastically. Now, clinical judgment required, no doubt. Patient preference is very important. So it's not that I'm saying that this is one size fits all, but from my personal experience and living in McAllen, the most obese city in the United States, the combination of intermittent fasting with low carbohydrate lifestyle has had dramatic improvements in weight loss and basically resolving the metabolic syndrome and putting diabetes type 2 in remission that efficiently. Now, you have the 16 hours. What I tell patients, okay, you achieved your 16 hours. Okay, now it's noon. Are you hungry? No, then don't eat. If you listen to your body, key point, listen to your body. If you're not hungry, do not eat. It's lunchtime. Who cares? I mean, if you're not hungry, do not go and do not eat. Now, maybe it's your 18-hour fast and now you're hungry. Go ahead and have your big nutritious meal. How much? I don't care. I just want you to avoid the processed junk, the processed sugars, processed food, processed carbohydrates. Eat real food, and I'll stick to that concept. Basically, the closer that it is to the earth, the better it's going to be for you. If we start focusing on high protein and fats, yeah, saturated fat, monounsaturated fat, I mean, I'm not going to get into that detail because it drives some people insane. But the point is, focus on real food, focus on nutritious food, and apply it in that fasting window. Now, the 20/4, which is 20 hours fasting, 4-hour eating window, this is also considered or known as the warrior diet, which basically you have 4 hours to eat. Why? Because those that are doing one meal a day, which is the OMAD, the issue in this case is that, well, chugging down all your caloric intake in one meal, it's pretty challenging. So I tried this, I do it, but I know that I'm underneath my requirement of protein, at least, for example. So 24, at least it gives you 4-hour window to be meeting your requirements. Once again, this requires a little bit of tweaking, but it's identifying and finding what works best for you. Is it a fad? Well, I mean, the point to this is, like, when did eating 3 times a day start? I mean, do you wake up hungry? And most people, their answer is no. Why are you eating? Well, because breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Says who? Nobody. Oh, yeah. In 1944, basically, publicity campaigns were initiating to make people eat more breakfast, more cereal, and more processed stuff. And that is actually where initially it started. If we go back to the Industrial Revolution, basically in 1760, that's when, secondary to the working hours, people started eating 3 times a day. But prior to that, if we start thinking about a hunter-gatherer situation, think about it. If you're a prolific hunter and you go to the middle of the woods or a forest, are you going to be eating 3 times a day? No. You think your genes changed in the last 300 years? Nope. So, yes, I mean, the other thing people can read is the Naked Ape, for example, from Desmond Morris. I mean, we can see our basically evolution and start incorporating concepts. Is there a correct answer to everything? No. Do we think that breakfast is the most important meal of the day? I certainly don't think so. Are there other health benefits beyond weight loss? Definitely. Now, I cannot get into detail of the physiological scenario in this, but please look at the bibliography there, and it involves basically the articles that mention this. So, what other things can we benefit? Well, diabetes type 2 can go into remission, and this has to do with the insulin resistance. Now, metabolic syndrome also improves. Mental acuity improves. Depression and mood disorders have been shown to improve as well. Improvement on inflammatory markers, protection against oxidative stress, neuroprotective effects, longevity. This has been shown mostly in animals and mice, but work is being done around this. Muscular health and autophagy. So as I said, please look at the last 3 slides with the bibliography there. Now, touching a little bit of physiology behind the intermittent fasting. I have involved a couple of more complicated slides, but I tried to simplify and try to organize this the best way that I could for people to understand it. And basically, I found this way of explaining it. We've got benefits that are related to insulin and those that are not related to insulin. So Before I go a little bit into insulin, I want you to understand this couple of curves that come from Joseph Kraft. Also, it'd be important if you understand the carbohydrate insulin model of obesity. But basically, what this slide here is showing you is that from 15,000 people that Joseph Kraft was analyzing, he identified basically 4 different types of insulin patterns when somebody was eating. From the 15,000, about 75% already had some insulin resistance, which means that you have an elevated insulin level already at baseline. And insulin is your storage hormone. And hyperinsulinemia has been linked to many diseases, many issues. And that is why I focused when we were talking about the physiologic response on insulin related and non-insulin related. So here we have, for example, hyperinsulinemia, and I'm going to touch a couple of points. So if we improve the insulin sensitivity, why are we going to be improving it? Well, if your body is exposed to a substance for a prolonged period of time, so let's say all of you that eat 3 times a day or that you eat 5 times a day with your snacking and stuff, you're basically spiking insulin multiple times a day. What happens if I give you a shot of tequila 5 times a day? Well, initially you're going to have a buzz and you're going to be drunk, but in 1 month, what's going to happen is you're going to develop tolerance to alcohol. So you're not going to get drunk as you did on the first day. Well, same thing goes for insulin. I'm oversimplifying the concept. Yes, I understand. But the point is, if you're spiking insulin 5 times a day, the concept is you will start developing resistance to insulin. And the higher your glucose spikes, which happens mostly with processed junk, processed carbohydrates, the worse off your insulin spike is going to be, and you will start developing insulin resistance. Now, why is this important? Well, for example, in blood pressure, insulin has been shown to increase endothelin-1, vasoconstrictor, so pressure goes up. It also has been shown to affect the nitric oxide process, so decreased nitric oxide production, therefore less vasodilation, hypertension goes up. The other one, arterial smooth muscle cell proliferation. So your arteries start getting thicker and less compliant, increased blood pressure. And insulin alone, high levels of insulin will stimulate your kidneys. They will absorb more sodium, therefore absorb more water, and there you go. You have hypertension. And this is one of the main reasons why we can actually see patients who are actually doing intermittent fasting with low carb or ketogenic diet, and we see them wean off from 3 maxed out blood pressure medications in about 6 weeks. That dramatic, the changes. Inflammation and atherosclerosis. Well, when we have an insulin-resistant adipocyte, it will shift and it will start making inflammatory adipokines, inflammatory cytokines, which will then affect overall inflammation. But in case of a smooth muscle cell proliferation in our arteries, for example, so if you got smooth muscle cell proliferation and now you have inflammation, and you could basically be affecting vulnerable plaque and creating ACS. So that's one of the theories about hyperinsulinemia in a very simplified manner that can affect. Next slide, I'll show a little bit more. So not insulin related. Well, your metabolism, there could be a metabolism improvement, or people are going to tell you what your basic metabolic rate is going to go down, your resting metabolic rate. How? Why? You're not changing your caloric intake. I'm not telling you to eat less. We're focusing on eating the same amount of calories. So what we actually see is the counterpart. We actually see a little bit of increase in your metabolic rate that can happen depending on your fasting window and how nutritious food you're eating by increasing catecholamine production. Muscle health. You fast. If you fast for 48 hours, your growth hormone spike can increase up to 5-fold. Now, what happens? 5-fold plus exercise plus good nutrition. Yeah, you guessed it. You're going to be developing muscle. So this slide, I'm not going to get into detail. Pause it and look at the different ways that insulin is going to have an important role on your organs or on these tissues. Now, this is what happens with insulin resistance. I cannot go over them because of time issues, but you're going to see the fantastic relation that we can find when we start seeing unbalance from the insulin to glucagon ratio. Therefore, insulin resistance, diabetes, and just imagine what happens to those individuals that are now injecting insulin, and we see them with 40 units, 60 units of insulin BID and top. I mean, look at this, and it's going to tell you a lot of the issues that we see with the hypertriglyceridemia, dyslipidemia, hypertension, etc. Frequent questions. Is intermittent fasting recommended for life or only for brief periods of time? Well, I'll answer this with a question. Is eating 3 to 5 times a day recommended for life? You can answer that yourself. In my opinion, I'm never ever going back to eating 3 times a day. I find it completely unnecessary, and it's going to be a personal choice, and you have to see what intermittent fasting can do for you. And in my opinion, if people want to apply this for patients and implement them, they need to experience this themselves. So they feel a little bit more comfortable. That is the pathway that I chose. I initiated with me, then family, then friends, and after a while, my own patients were asking me, since I had such dramatic changes, to guide them through this process. So, it involves your clinical judgment. Is intermittent fasting contraindicated in certain individuals? Once again, clinical judgment. And one needs to understand what the issues could be. And the most prevalent and common issue is patients with diabetes because, well, they titrate the carbohydrate to the insulin that they're receiving. So if you're getting such amount of insulin, well, you're going to need certain amount of carbohydrates. And that's the wrong way. That's the opposite of how it should be. So this will now introduce me to debunking myths. Now, diabetes control becomes difficult with intermittent fasting compared to regular frequent meals. No, the opposite. Now, if you're doing intermittent fasting, think about it. If you're only eating in an 8-hour window, you will only have spikes in an 8-hour window. It just becomes easier to control. And this article by Jason Fung actually shows how insulin resistance starts improving with insulin sensitivity, and the same applies for type 2 diabetics. Now, if you're concerned about type 1 diabetics, you can also apply intermittent fasting and even a low carbohydrate lifestyle with excellent glycemic control. How? Well, number one, you need to know what you're doing, and likely working in conjunction with endocrinologist in order to implement. I have a couple of patients like this in which I work very closely with an endocrinologist, and we have been able, with continuous glucose monitoring, decreasing the carbohydrate intake, achieving the best glycemic control that the patient's ever had. Recommend this book a lot. Now, this just was updated in the American Diabetic Association guidelines, and here it is. It says reducing overall carbohydrate intake for individuals with diabetes has demonstrated, here we go, the most evidence for improving glycemia and may be applied in a variety of eating patterns that meet individual needs and preferences. Mind you, I'm not saying what type of low carb. You want to do a low carb vegan, you want to do a low, go ahead and you implement your modified Mediterranean diet, your modified paleo diet, but the point is that it has the most data to improve your glycemic control. Pregnant women who fast can harm the fetus. There's really no trials out there, but what we can focus on is, well, this month people are doing Ramadan. So basically what this study shows is there's no issues, no problems on females that were fasting in Ramadan. Do we have a long perspective random? No, we do not. Once again, common sense. But here, for example, most obesity in the United States, what do you think is worth? Eating 5 times a day processed junk and going to gestational diabetes, increasing your growth hormone, your insulin and insulin growth like factors, or fasting and eating nutritious food? Once again, balance, clinical judgment. Elderly individuals don't benefit from fasting. Once again, it depends on the elderly individual. What happens if you have a type 2 diabetic with metabolic syndrome that has severe case of hyperinsulinemia and all its side effects? Well, the best thing that this guy can do is probably low carb and intermittent fasting. But now let's say you have a healthy guy and he just wants to improve his health. Well, fasting for 48 hours will increase your growth hormone up to 5-fold in spikes. If you increase your growth hormone and you're actually intaking good nutritious food and you're exercising, you're going to start developing muscle. And this is key. Now, I'll show you a couple of books in a moment when I start talking about muscle health in intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting may accelerate dementia. Actually, studies are showing completely the opposite. And very interestingly, with Alzheimer there and being considered a type 3 diabetes, low carb, intermittent fasting, ketogenic diets have shown promising data about how to approach these neurological issues. Intermittent fasting curtails the effect of exercise and bodybuilding programs. Well, here we have an article from Dominic D'Agostino, basically in which it shows that ketones have anti-catabolic effects. So basically, it protects your muscles. Now, does intermittent fasting absolutely mean that you're going to be producing ketones? No, it definitely has to do with the type of lifestyle and how many carbs you're eating. But if you approach it with a low carb lifestyle, you will have episodes of ketosis, and therefore you will be achieving this and anti-catabolic effects. Now, you decide to apply a 24 to 48 hour fast. This means that your growth hormone can go up, and therefore it can actually improve your building blocks and building muscle. Here we have two guys, two bodybuilders that have the Brad Pilon, who wrote Eat Stop Eat, and Martin Birkin, who wrote Lean Gains, and they apply different fasting windows from eating normally 5 days a week and fasting for 48 hours, or doing intermittent fasting. Look at the guys; they don't seem cachectic or having issues with muscle, in my opinion. So, almost here in the end, these are just a couple of books that I recommend anybody that is interested on the points that I just went through. And I would like to finish by saying the benefits that I've had in my life. Well, I suffered migraines since I'm 12, and I've tried every medication that you can imagine. And for me, finally, when I started incorporating low carbohydrate lifestyle with intermittent fasting in my life, the migraines are absolutely gone. I do find an increased focus. People or other physicians that implement a fasting window or intermittent fasting, we also notice that our day becomes more productive. People go to lunch and then they eat, and then basically their productivity decreases because they're tired. In my case, I mean, I don't eat. I'd rather go and do a couple of push-ups or go to the gym, which is 3 minutes away from my hospital. Work a little bit, 15, 20 minutes. No need for more, in my opinion, when you focus on quality. And I have found it as a life-changing scenario. And going back, and I mean, one of the ongoing stories you're going to feel is that people go back and they say, I feel like I was 18 again, depending on your age. But my point is, I do believe that it has significant improvements in one's life, and I've witnessed this with my patients. Once again, I do incorporate low carbohydrate lifestyle with intermittent fasting, and I basically choose different permutations of the amount of carbohydrates with the fasting windows and tailor it for my patients. Here are the bibliographies about the information that I've spoken about, so you can pause and you can find. I also have a Mendeley library that you can contact me and I'll give you access to. And well, thank you very much. I hope you found this video blog maybe a little bit longer than it should, but it's a pleasure, and I hope it's useful for you guys. Take care.